You know, it's interesting when I go back in my career of designing whitetail properties back to '05, when I went to my first client. There's a real big discussion on how to create a buck bed back then. And in fact, I know people within the industry, people I respect, that were actually sued, literally sued over, divulging buck bedding secrets. It actually went to court. It was thrown out with prejudice, meaning they could never bring it back because it was so fictitious, and terrible lawsuit that cost individuals lots of money. They're found not guilty. No, nothing happened, but everyone spent a lot of money. I can remember one person that was just kind of on the side. He spent $13,100. I remember him talking about it at muzzleloader deer camp in Ohio back in the day. Just really contentious, ridiculous to a point. The thought that you could build a buck bed with 7 certain secrets and draw every buck in the neighborhood to that buck bed, or the biggest one into that buck bed, and you go put a standby and shoot it. That was the thought, believe it or not. But that's still being taught out there, which is kind of ridiculous. But really a lot of misinformation out there about building buck beds, buck beds with hinge cuts, making canopies above, the deer in theory go underneath just like a trampoline in the middle of summer, and a lot of ridiculous stuff that wastes habitat. And we've seen it, how they don't work over and over again, and how it's hurt landowner properties and cover and habitat and wasted trees. I'll give you a little tip: when you make a canopy bedding area back in the woods on a nice little knoll and it's shaded out because you just brought all these trees that were 30 feet high, hinge cut them, they're surrounded by trees that are 70, 80 feet tall, 60 feet tall. No shade is taken out, so then those trees that are down below get shaded out and die. So what looks really cool to begin with dies within a year or two, and it's just dried out sticks. And someone paid thousands of dollars to have it done. We've seen it over and over again, unfortunately. So when it comes to buck beds, first you need to think of location. And I could tell you, I was someone that was threatened to be sued over this. We had Deer Talk back in 2010 in an area in Wisconsin, and I went to that. It might have been 2011, but I think it was 2010. And I went to a client property. They asked me to come back and hold a habitat day where they raised money for their QDMA branch. I was informed by Brian Murphy, the president of the QDMA, that I was going to be sued, not by the QDMA, but by an individual, if I talked about buck beds or how to create them, which really what it boils down to, and what we filmed to keep as evidence, and said I won't talk about buck beds, and I'd give them, that person, unique props to just basically say, if you believe in buck beds, you go see this person. He has right-hand man there, and they're in the discussion to make sure I didn't do anything wrong. But I just talked about what I see, which is totally different what that person saw. And it's interesting when it comes to buck beds and deer beds in general, it's all based on location and location of stress and food. For example, if you have a big food source, great food plots, for example, you're not going to have buck's bed right next to that because it's too high of a stress level. That's where does and fawns want to bed. They want to bed does and fawns are straight line movers, meaning they have a food source here, does will bed here if you have that adequate layer, and then bucks will bed back here. Kind of that bottom of the funnel of daylight movement ends up at that food plot. Bucks are in the back. So bucks bed by location and proximity to stress and food and does. Not that the does are there, that's why they bed there. That's a really misunderstanding. The does are there because the food source is attractive and they bed as close to it as possible. And the bucks are there because the food source is attractive and they bed as close as they can without interfering with the does and getting into the mix of all that stress. Hope that makes sense. It goes food, does, bucks. If you don't have the food, don't have the bucks. Bucks are willing to travel 1.5 miles or more to find good food. So if you're living on private land, you can't create buck beds or buck bedding areas if you don't have a food source that they're related to. And an ag field is not a food source, not a good food source, not a powerful food source. It is for the summertime. But sometime in October, November, like around here, it gets plowed, picked, manured, and it's no use anymore. It's no food source. The alfalfa around here gets yellow, stemmy, dormant. The beans get picked. There's no food out in the ag fields. So at some point, the ag is a very terrible food source because you can't define does, bucks, bedding on your land for the entire season without a food source. When the ag field is gone, there's no food source. That's where food plots come in. Something that'll last the entire season. Then you can establish that pattern of food, does, and then bucks. However, if you have the food, but you have big open cover next to it and you don't have any room for does to bed for 200 yards, 300 yards, those bucks get pushed off so far because they're behind the does that you won't have any bucks bedding or relating to that food source on a daily basis either, so you have no buck bedding. So that means you have to have doe bedding next to the food, and then you have bucks. A lot of people do it the other way around. It's even taught sometimes. You create these 7 secrets in this buck bed and you'll attract every buck in the neighborhood. Folks, that doesn't work. You have to have locations. So when I talked in that seminar and gave that talk and went out on the property to show where bucks bed and where does bed, I talked about this layering approach. And that's why it's so different. There's no secrets. You can talk about down here, number 7, no secrets. Timber, what kind of timber do you have? It's really important. Like when we go out and create bedding areas around here, we have mixed quality timber and low quality. We have box elder, cherry, maple, oak, different types of oak, aspen. The aspen is really critical because we have aspen pockets. So when I go out in the woods here, we have a lot to work with. I love creating bedding area with box elder, but we need to remove canopy above it if that's the case, if it's not on the edge. Aspen is great, but you have to completely cut it down to the ground and get regeneration. So I love cutting pockets of a ½ acre, 3/4 of an acre, 1.5 acres, which is about what I have here and there. They're small pockets. The box elder is great. We're hinge cutting those, very predictable where they're going to fall because they're always leaning. We have a lot of junk oak, so where you have a large dominant tree right here, and then you have this low leaner right here with a few leaves, that's junk. Take it out, drop it down to the ground. Allow this big oak right here that's a huge mass producer. It's the best trunks. Those are the ones that loggers would like, but I want to keep on the property because they're the only mass producing trees. Plus, there's a lot of junk to take out first. So I like taking out the junk. You get regeneration, you put structure on the ground. When it comes to oaks, box elders, I'm hinge cutting. Those oaks I'm just completely cutting out there. A lot of them are 8, 10, 12 inches diameter, 14 inches diameter. And then I'm cutting those aspen pockets out, and that's really what I need to focus on my property. Now maybe yours. Maybe yours is a 15-year-old woods of mixed maple, mostly red maple, 6 inches, 8 inches diameter, just pole timber. Well, it's the hardest. You have to hinge cut about waist high. You don't want that canopy. You want the deer to be able to move around this, be able to hit the browse. For example, if you hinge cut a tree where you cut halfway through, you push it over with a hinge cutting tool. We use Nick Nation's tool out of Michigan. It's called the Habitat Hook. Really cool product, but push that over high. Now all the browse and all the cover is above your head. It's way above the deer's head. They can't get any food. They don't have any cover that they're relating to. They're relating to cover at about our waist belly high, not our head high. And so when you're starting hinge cutting high and going up, that's a very bad thing. So instead, you create pockets of hingeable, meaning 6, 8 inch trees, oak, maple, cherry, sometimes hickory. You're cutting that, not aspen, box elder maybe. Ash is another good one to hinge cut. But you're cutting that down 6, 8 inches diameter and smaller in pockets. I like cutting pockets. I always think in pockets. When we're cutting aspen down, we're cutting about an acre pocket, 1.5 acres, ½ acre, because that's what's there. And then we're moving on to another 50, 60, 70 yards cutting something else. And that's within these areas that we want more bedding to take place, whether it's does or bucks. Same with if you're cutting down one mature tree. You're using a twisted trunk, double trunk, leaner, cutting it down maybe with the support of 2 or 3 other trees so you can get enough sunlight to the ground. Always look to the south. Make sure the southerly sky is open. Look for holes you can cut so you're getting sunlight into that area. Multiple holes to the southwest, to the southeast, straight south during the middle of the day. North is where it's shaded. The sun's always in the southern horizon, so always think about that, how you're getting sunlight into that area. That's critical. It might be you're cutting that mature tree down with several and you're moving on another 50, 60 yards, 30, 40 yards, depending on the size of the tree. And you're cutting down another pocket. These pockets could be the size of a small garage. They could be acres. In the case of aspen, you want to clear cut a large area, meaning an acre, 2 acres at a time, and move on. Then they'll all grow that age, they'll regenerate quickly. So whether you're putting structure on the ground, I was on a property last year, about a year ago at this time in December, and it was about a 30-acre hollow. There was nothing in there, no deer beds. There's a few deer tracks crisscrossing through, but there's no cover. There's one down tree in the middle, for whatever reason, maybe a big ash that died. But there's about 20, 30 beds all the way around it. And so, kind of like fish on the bottom on a drop-off, you put a Christmas tree down there, pallets, and fish will relate to it. It's no different than deer. They have to have that structure, that bedding structure. So when you're just cutting timber, I've had clients that have improved their hunt greatly by cutting in September in Michigan. Bow season opens October 1st, and they have their best bow season because they put structure on the ground in otherwise open woods. So aspen, clear cutting, box elder, hinge cutting, red maple, hinge cutting, oak. Maybe you're knocking down big mature trees and then moving on another 50, 60 yards. You're trying to focus on the twisted, the leaning, the multi-trunked out of those mature trees so you're not cutting timber value. Don't do this before a timber harvest. Timber harvest is the best way. You know, have some, you want deer to be in this 20 acres out of 30, have the timber guy come in and take it out. I recommend that you contact loggers yourself. Make sure you get a contract. Foresters are great. Foresters make sure the process is kept honest and kept accurate, and make sure the contract is good. But a lot of times it's put up for bid and it might take 2 or 3 years to get that cutting. So I look at, like, when the average landowner is only in their land for 5 years, might as well get it cut now and really enjoy that and be able to enjoy that cutting, because it doesn't take long. Again, September, cutting trees on the ground, putting trees down, giving that structure, and you can make a big difference. We're talking about this, you know, those are different ways to cut habitat. What about low brush? You know, that's another thing too, where we're looking at autumn olive thickets, where you have these big autumn olive thickets, really thick. We'll go in there and open up trails, open up bedrooms. Bedrooms the size of a small room, might be 20 feet by 15 feet. You're opening up areas that deer can actually move throughout and call their own. You know, might be in areas of high grass. I've seen areas of planted fields where people are adding soil to, where they're putting a few bucket loads, where it creates a little bit of a rise, and a buck can just see above that grass or right at that, and that can work sometimes too. But you have to have those rooms, you have to have those passageways, call it a maze and pocket effect. And that maze and pocket doesn't matter if it's low brush, grass, hardwood regeneration, pockets where you're putting structure down the ground. You give that maze and pocket effect. When deer bed, they maze, they move around. You can always tell if you're following big tracks in big woods. Look up the Benoit Way, the way they hunted out northeast, Maine, Vermont, where they follow a big buck track and run them down. And when that track starts to wander, they know it's getting ready to bed or feed, and they'd cut out in front of it, try to cut that track. If they don't cut the track, they know where he's at then. Pretty cool. And then they'd sneak in, try to sneak up on him when he's in his bed. But that's when you know when a buck's bedding, he starts to maze and move around and feed and browse, and they're slowing down. That's what you want them to do on your land when you think bedding area. Think maze and pocket. No dead ends, because you don't want dogs to run them into a corner and be able to kill them and add that stress. Hope it makes sense in talking about all this. You can talk about timber cutting, some low brush. Ladies come first. What I mean by that is you have food. You have to work on that doe habitat first, that doe bedding opportunity. You know, it used to be big beds for does, small beds for bucks. I never believed that, because that's not what you see in the wild. You see bedding opportunity by maze and pocket effect. Hardwood regeneration. Browse, they have to have it. That's why it can't be head high. But if you have does and food and you have enough room left over, I call that depth of cover. That could be 300 yards worth of depth on a 40-acre parcel. It could be a half mile on 200 acres. Bottom line is you have enough depth where you have does bedded by high quality food that lasts the entire season, and then you'll have room for bucks behind that. You keep those consistent. You could have multiple lines, little mini micro movements on a parcel, even 3 or 4 movements on one 40-acre parcel where that big food source or a couple comes down to that. And when you think about food sources, make sure you don't segment them and break them apart too much. I keep seeing that on client properties. One the other day where they had big screening stretched out through, and the bucks avoid it. They didn't even see any bucks out in those fields. Bucks want an open area. Think about it. When you're going down the road and you look at a pocket out in ag land, look at a back corner somewhere, there's a bunch of deer feeding. It's not like you see big bucks way over here, the rest of the herd way over here. Usually they're all together. They're all together because they're okay with that. There's this thought that I went to a client last year and they had an acre food plot that was broken up into 10-second segments with old miscanthus grass. These deer couldn't see from 1/10 acre to the next. Those bucks would come in September, cover of darkness, maybe once during the light, and you would never see those big bucks, oldest bucks in the neighborhood again. Come in one time. They don't want to go into food sources like that. They can't see. I think they feel confined. They're not used to that. They'll go to some place where those does and fawns, they get used to that burrowing into cover. That's not a big old buck. He likes to be able to see. A lot of times he'll come into a field on a little rise in the corner by a good bedding area. He'll come through that staging area. He'll get to that rising, survey the whole field, and then he'll go to feeding. Bottom line is, think about that. When you're looking at deer naturally out in fields, you see them congregated in one corner for a reason. That means you don't have to separate them when you're building big bedding areas. But it always starts with the ladies first. Food, ladies, then bucks. You have to think that order. A lot of people think, well, this is a great spot for a buck bedding. Well, it's not if you don't have room for does and then you have that quality food source. Always think that order. Create buck bedding opportunity. We shot a couple really nice bucks out of a bedding area, the side of a bedding area, the water hole, a whole setup that took a year to make. Lots of different facets of that, putting the 300-gallon tank in, putting a quarter-mile road down to get it, cutting the bedding area in the off-season, mock scrape, filling the water holes, planting the strip of quarter-mile access, the area around the tank, putting in ryegrass and clover just to hold the soil. It took a lot of different steps to create that. Those bucks came out of there. In fact, Lucky came out. He's a 5-year-old. I passed him up. 10 minutes later, I shoot 45, the one I was really after, a nice 5-year-old. Lucky was a nice 5-year-old too, but I wanted 45. He came out. Bo, I would have been happy with 2. 7-4 if he happened to be around. But I wanted to let Lucky go another year for whatever reasons, whether you were to shot him or not. It doesn't really matter. The point is that I don't care where they were at in that bedding area bedded. I just care that they're there. So instead of focusing on, you want to make sure you don't follow any advice where this buck will take up an area half the size of this table and you need to have a stand looking right down into there. Don't think that because you're too close to him, you're going to spook him out, he's not going to be there. Think, I don't care if he's bedding in that 10 acres, I don't care where, I just care that he's there. Because when he comes out, I'm going to kill him. And that's what you find 80% of the time happens if you set up a good system like this. And so don't think room for one, think bedding opportunity. You want to create bedding opportunity on your land. On 30 acres, you could make enough bedding opportunity for 200 deer. You don't have 200 deer. The point is you need that separation. You need a buck to be able to feel comfortable from walking from his bedding area all the way to the food source in cover. No open holes. And you might have an open stretch of 30, 40 yards in hardwoods. That's one thing, but it's contained. They can't see for hundreds of yards out. So you're creating buck bedding opportunity, doe bedding opportunity. Who cares about the bedding area size? Don't overthink this. You know there's people actually putting bedding logs, like with the thought that a deer will back up to a bedding log. You know why? Because there's no side cover. Side cover is what you create when you put hinge cuts, create them that are waist high. You have brush, briars, weeds growing. That's all side cover. A hill, side cover. But when you put canopies up top, it shades out the ground, and you don't get any growth. The only cover there is a log if you put it in there. When you add a log, that's only because the bedding area or the deer bed itself is inadequate. So you have to add a log to that. You know, there's people going in there and raking out the bedding areas? Because you know, if you don't rake it out, no buck has ever laid down anywhere without someone raking it out for him first. You got to rake it out. Come on, guys. There's so much other things to do. There's people that are doing that and practicing it every year, and they never shoot any deer because they waste so much time on dumb little habitat things that don't make a difference and really lack hunting skill and hunting experience and actually when to get out in the woods and how to kill those deer. Planted field, humps and bumps, you got to have cover. So you could plant conifers. That's a base form of cover. Take 50% of them out, or don't plant 50% out in pockets. Diversify those areas, and when those conifers come in several years, you have that base cover. I like planting switchgrass in an open field because in 2 years you have adequate bedding cover, maybe 3 years at the most. And then you can plant other things within. It doesn't matter how high they are because you have that base form of switchgrass for cover. Red cedar is another one. Maybe you have red cedar field that's been overtaken by red cedar. Go in and remove 40-50% of it. Leave the outside intact of the bedding base. That might be conifers, red cedar, spruce, pine. Could be grasses, could be shrubs. And then you're creating those pockets within. You're attempting to diversify and maybe add some humps and bumps to it. Some little ridges for bucks to lay on. Sometimes they like that, but I don't think that's a necessity. That's more if you have the equipment and time. That's one of those last 10% things that you try to accomplish 80% of the stuff first with just 20% of the work. Sometimes, yeah, you can accomplish 10% more, but it's going to take a lot of work to do so. A lot more than it did everything else combined. So planting a field is great because if you have heavy switchgrass or cover, base bedding cover next to your access, less likely that deer are bedded there right at your feet when you're coming in. And then on the inside of food, for example, closer to your woods and cover, that's where you want to start creating that bedding opportunity, mixed habitat, have it all screened in. And then that way you have does and fawn bedding right next to the food, and then you create buck bedding opportunity within. A lot of times we'll see fields where you have 40 acres of wood, you have 20 acres of field. You can create big food out in those fields, and on the inside of that you can start creating doe bedding opportunity. That mixed habitat, grasses, it's all sealed in, and then you actually cut some of the timber on that edge. Now you take all those does that are bedding somewhere in the woods, you put them up in that field or field edge, and now what used to be doe bedding turns into buck bedding. Didn't do anything different. Always remember too, when you cut that hardwood down and you're not hinge cutting it, you have that top in there, it's dead obviously. Great time in the springtime to take 5, 6, 7 white pines or white spruce. Remember white because white pines or white spruce are shade tolerant. Great opportunity to poke those little seedlings back in that top so they're caged from deer. Deer don't eat them. They'll still get a little sunlight because you just cut it. Now you can start to diversify your hardwoods too, so it's not just all hardwoods regenerating, which is what your logger would like, or forester, but instead you have mixed habitat, which is what wildlife likes. You have conifers coming in, you want briars, you want shrubs, you want hardwood regeneration, you want it all. Grasses, weeds, that's all part of bedding component habitat. You want to diversify it. So imagine doing that in the field. You have, Dylan, if we can see this okay?
Yep.
So you have 60 acres like this. You have a 40 acre woodlot. So woods up here, field down here. Let's say you take big food source right here, maybe another food source like here, maybe a little connection right here. You have a thin strip going into this woods. Then all of a sudden you can create a stand location there, You turn all this into doe bedding and habitat. You do solid cover on the outside. Deer are less likely to bed in solid pines or grasses. So you have the food right here, little food. Then you start to work on your wood. You start to create those layers first here. Then you keep working back, little pocket cutting. You're getting better diversity and vegetation. Now you take the does that were bedding right here and you put them right there. Right down into here. Now those bucks who are bedding on the neighbors right here are non-existent at all. Now you create buck bedding opportunity from here back. So you have 30 acres of solid potential buck bedding opportunity where you had none before. And that's how you reposition. And that's where if you look at that food, does, bucks, and creating that opportunity, it all starts with that concept. And that's why going back, I didn't have to feel threatened by divulging any bedding secrets because the bedding secrets were rubbish. No secrets at all. Because if you weren't following these concepts of layering of food, does, bucks, then you weren't going to have a bedding area at all. It doesn't matter if it's on public land, private land. The cool thing is on public land, again, I talk about it all the time, you don't need to do all this work. You just go find a food source, find where there's doe bedding opportunity, and what's left behind will be buck bedding opportunity. Big open parcels of woods on public land. Bucks will be bedded sometimes a half mile away from those does and that food source. Or on private land, you can sandwich that into 200 yards in areas that are open, lots of ag, where there's not a lot of cover, where cover is at a premium. That's not the case in big public land settings where a lot of studies, scientific studies are done that show a buck might bed. He might move 3/4 mile in one day to go to an afternoon food source. It's because he has that cover and he can take it. In fragmented parcels, that's not the case. And when you add in hunting pressure and a lack of quality habitat on parcels, it becomes even more fragmented and bucks even move less during daylight hours. Who cares about under the cover of darkness? You're focusing on daylight. And if you do these things, building a buck bed, like we're doing here, we talk to our clients all the time, and our clients do, then you can start to really reposition, not only reposition deer, but have those bucks in the first place. Have them focus on a small parcel. Because they only want to move 200-300 yards on average during the daylight on the average private fragmented parcel. Because if they move further than that, they're moving over fences, they're moving across borders. When they do so, the amount of hunters they see, it goes up exponentially, and the potential of them reaching an older age is virtually non-existent because they cross too many borders. Well, think about that. Think about these concepts right here. How to cut is one thing. For your particular type of habitat and woods, we try to show a lot of examples in that and how to create bedding areas in our playlist. Always check out our playlist on YouTube. And it will mention, it kind of goes back to, you look at that in hill country. We have our new web class, Hunting Hills and Thermals. It's really critical. One of the things we talk about is where the bucks locate. And if you have food up high, they bed down low. If you have food down low, they bed down up high. If you have food high and low, they bed in the middle. If there's enough room left over. Again, it always goes back to food. It doesn't matter if it's uphill, downhill. There's people out there talking about bucks only bed on the military crest or the top third or 25% of the elevation or 20% or 10. It's all rubbish. Because the food's up there, they're not bedding there. They're going to bed down low. They'll bed in the bottom. They have to follow that chain of command. Basically, doe family groups rule the roost. You have food. Then you have bucks behind all of that. And then you match it to the type of habitat you have. When it comes to buck bedding areas, Might even make that a higher percentage of sunlight hitting the ground, a little bit of extra cutting. A few more conifers I'm planting because I want more diversity in those locations. I'll connect those buck bedding areas on the outside of a property, an area where you're expecting to move with travel corridors. Maybe they relate to a water hole, mock scrapes. And then on the inside, you're looking for random bedding opportunity, and then certainly working on beds closer to that food source for does and fawns. So that's how you put it all together. Hope that makes sense. We have a lot of videos that talk about this, but we'll be doing this year. And like I said, I've been designing properties since '05. So you can imagine I've been on, I have to check now, but I don't know if the number, I'll hit 1,400 clients at some point this year. I hit 1,300 sometime last year. But bottom line is I've seen it all. When it comes to mock scrapes, bedding areas, food plots, mistakes, failures, timber management, the good, the bad, the ugly. And this is something that's really critical that I've seen from day one. You know, not only in my own lands going back in the mid-90s, but really how it's taking shape on private land. It's pretty cool because we can go to a private land parcel and you have food here and you have remote area here and you say, how many bucks bed back there? And if they don't, why? Are you hunting there? Are you pressuring them? Because you can see that layered. Or you'll say, boy, the food's here, does have to be here, bucks are here. And they'll say, wow, how would you know that? Well, it's pretty easy. Just always remember that. Food, does, bucks. If you have the opportunity, that's the way it's always going to be. There's no magic formula. Definitely no secrets. If you apply these concepts, then you can start to not only build buck bedding areas and doe bedding areas and how it all relates on your own private land, but scout and find it on public land because it's the exact same concept. It'll help you design a great hunt this fall, whether you're hunting private or public land. Hey, I'm really excited to introduce to you our Hills and Thermals web class. It's something we worked on all year. We're trying to put lots of facets of scouting, aerial imagery, diagrams on the whiteboard to really teach you how the wind moves through hills and how you should find bedding areas, how it relates to deer movements in general, how that relates to, this is a bedding area stand, this is a food source afternoon stand. We really tried to put this together and offer you a complete picture of how to navigate hills and find better success consistently where you hunt.